What urban legends do you believe in? The one about the female bus driver on a long-distance bus route. A bunch of thugs got on at a stop and tried to sexually assault the driver. None of the passengers said a word or tried to help her, except one guy, who couldn't stop the thugs and ended up getting beat up. Afterwards, the female bus driver insisted that the guy who tried to help her should get off the bus. Confused, he protested by telling her he was sorry about what happened, but he did try his best to help. The driver, however, ignored his pleas and wouldn't start the bus unless he got off. Now the passengers who were silent before are yelling at him to GTFO, and he eventually did. The guy ended up walking for hours to the nearest town. Tired and pissed, he found a hotel room and crashed. When he woke up the next morning, he saw on the news that the bus he was on went off the road while on a mountain path, killing everyone on board. Edit, spelling.
The bus driver's reaction after that incident is surprising. It's messed up how no one helped her at the time, and then she turns on the only guy who tried. The ending is ironic, with him walking away just to find out he dodged a bullet. It raises a lot of questions about people's responses in emergencies and the consequences of inaction.
Saw this on Reddit and have seen it a few times elsewhere, but I'd like to believe it to be true. The cops showed up to a college Halloween party to bust some underage drinkers. The cops approached one kid dressed as Jack Sparrow, and when they asked to see his ID, he ran to the balcony and said, "Gentlemen, you will always remember this day as the day you almost caught Captain Jack Sparrow." And then he jumped off the balcony on the second floor. He landed on the hard ground below and broke his leg. Still got the ticket, but is a legend now.
That's a wild story. Can't blame him for trying to make a memorable exit. Jumping off a balcony in a costume is risky, though. Sometimes being a legend comes with a price.
A woman drives into a petrol station late at night off a quiet motorway. The only person there is the attendant, a seedy-looking individual with a strange smile plastered on his face. He fills up the car and she presents him with her card. A pleased look flashes over his face and he has to suppress a grin as he excitedly tells her that she cannot make the payment outside and requests her to come inside to the register. The woman is really torn as to whether to do so, being inclined to refuse but also afraid of getting arrested if she were to drive off without paying. She elects to send a quick text to her husband, telling him where she is, before cautiously entering the shop with the attendant. He ushers her into the manager's office in the back of the shop. Then she spots the register near the door on the other side of the shop. Panicked, she prepares to make an excuse and run. She stops, however, when she looks at his face. Whilst he is still smiling, an expression of sheer terror is in his eyes and he whispers the word, "Please." Against her better judgment she complies and he locks the door after them. Immediately regretting her decision, she panics and looks for something to hit the man with, putting the desk between her and the man. The man turns around. He is no longer smiling. He lunges forward, for the phone on the manager's desk. Breathlessly, he splutters, "I saw the outline of a man in your backseat as you pulled into the station. When I was filling up the car, I saw the brief shine of a knife in his hand. I'm calling the police." Obviously, not exactly like this. But I could see something similar having happened. Appearances are deceiving.
This story definitely plays with the idea of initial impressions. The woman goes in thinking it's just a simple fuel stop, but that fast turns into something much darker. The attendant, who seems off at first, actually turns out to be looking out for her safety. It's a tense moment, showing how quickly situations can change based on what we perceive. Overall, it highlights that appearances can really deceive.
This is the legend of our neighboring country Wales in the UK. Pretty sad but believable. Enjoy. According to legend, the stone monument in the field marks the resting place of Gelert, the faithful hound of the medieval Welsh Prince Llewellyn the Great. The story, as written on the tombstone reads, in the 13th century Llewellyn, Prince of North Wales, had a palace at Bedgelert. One day he went hunting without Gelert, the faithful hound, who was unaccountably absent. On Llewellyn's return the truant, stained and smeared with blood, joyfully sprang to meet his master. The prince, alarmed, hastened to find his son, and saw the infant's cot empty, the bedclothes and floor covered with blood. The frantic father plunged his sword into the hound's side, thinking it had killed his heir. The dog's dying yell was answered by a child's cry. Llewellyn searched and discovered his boy unharmed, but nearby lay the body of a mighty wolf which Gelert had slain. The prince, filled with remorse, is said never to have smiled again. He buried Gelert here.
This tale is pretty straightforward. He ends up killing the dog, only to find the child safe, and a dead wolf nearby. It's a classic tragic misunderstanding. The prince's regret is heavy, and he doesn't smile again. The monument serves as a reminder of loyalty and the consequences of rash actions.
The Boiler Man, the Black Sergeant, very famous urban legend from where I'm from. Very popular with us kids back in the day. Story goes that during the Troubles, in Northern Ireland there was a police sergeant who had links to paramilitary groups and often leaked confidential information to these groups to assist in terrorist attacks. Rival factions jumped him one day and stripped him, put him in a boiler suit and stuck him in an abandoned industrial chimney and lit a fire at the bottom so that he died from smoke inhalation. To this day a man is seen roaming the woods near the industrial chimney dressed in a boiler suit, his face burnt and blackened and covered in soot. People have gone missing in the forest, and later locals reported groups of people stumbling around the forest dressed in boiler suits.
It shows how past conflicts can leave lasting scars on a place. The imagery of a man in a boiler suit, lost and roaming, paints a chilling picture. The idea of people going missing adds to the eeriness. The whole legend feels like a reminder of the dangers that can lurk in places tied to dark histories.
The Black Shuck, I don't 100% believe in it, but I think there's some truth to it. For those that don't know, the Black Shuck is a black shaggy dog with red or green saucer eyes said to roam the countryside of East Anglia, UK, Suffolk, Norfolk, Essex, Cambridgeshire, etc. It is said to be an omen of death, with reports as early as 1127 AD and as late as 1945, though there have been reported sightings in 2013. Edit. For your researching pleasure, if you are interested in the Black Shuck or live in East Anglia, I recommend googling the Green Children of Woolpit. Another urban legend from East Anglia, unrelated to the Black Shuck.
The Black Shuck sounds interesting. It's always intriguing how legends like this persist over centuries. I mean, whether it's real or just stories, it captures the imagination. Linking it to something like the Green Children of Woolpit is a nice touch. Urban legends can reveal a lot about the culture and fears of a place, even if they're not true.
Okay, here there are some sharp turns that are considered haunted, as there were many accidents in the past because there weren't many streetlights and people's unfamiliarity with the road. There's this turn next to an intersection that known for a pretty long time as being haunted by the victims. The road either way is a long stretched road, and usually the accidents occur in nighttime where drivers or riders drive straight into a canal built higher alongside the road. However, I believe it from another perspective. The urban legend is spread so that people become aware and careful on the turns. Anyway, there's a house near the turns that legit never been resided for a long time. I've witnessed it myself from the very beginning of the house's construction, and after a few years, the house is mostly vacant. Everyone comes and goes in a short period of time. I heard rumors about it being haunted, but I don't really know and want to know. Edit, more info.
The story of the haunted turns and the vacant house is intriguing. It makes sense that legends could serve a purpose, warning drivers to be cautious. That way, people might take the necessary care when approaching those sharp turns, especially at night. The house being empty adds to the eerie atmosphere. It's interesting how places can develop such a reputation. Kind of makes you wonder what really goes on there, if anything at all.
One of the stories of the Jersey Devil. Napoleon Bonaparte's brother, this part is historical fact, was living in NJ for a time. He was a fan of hunting, and so he goes out one winter day hunting bears. The bears in NJ are a different sort than in France, so he was excited. This part begins the legend. He got separated from his bodyguards while he was following hoof prints. They looked like they were running because they were close together, ankle to ankle, but long in stride. He figured it was a deer running from something, possibly a bear. His suspicions were confirmed by claw marks high on a tree the prints passed, but there were no bear paw prints in the snow, and it was fresh snow, so there should have been. Anyway, he tracks the deer for a while, and it goes under logs too low for a deer and skips terrain and all and seems to slow. He finds no spoor but broken branches, disturbed leaves, broken ice high up, and in passes too narrow for a deer's antlers. So he's thinking this is some odd New Jersey creature. Well, he was right. Because abruptly the tracks stopped in a copse of pine. Couldn't be found anywhere. He's creeped out and decides it's time to turn back, so he turns around and is confronted by a tall two-legged satyr type of beast with bat's wings, deer legs, man's body but leathery, and a donkey head, and its arms had claws for hands. The story is it screeched and he unloaded both barrels at it and was found pissing himself by his bodyguards. Did he really see JD or just say it to avoid embarrassment? I prefer the first option, myself.
The story has some interesting elements. The description of the beast is pretty wild, mixing various animal traits. It does make you wonder if he really encountered something or just freaked out in the woods. Either way, the idea of a creature like that lurking around is kind of unsettling. It plays into the whole Jersey Devil legend well.
My mum's family are from Granada, and growing up my grandma would tell me stories of La Diablesse and Ligarou. She swore she saw La Diablesse one day while stealing fruit as a child. As much as it seems silly, my grandma wasn't someone who usually believed in these things. Another time she told me about a snake that appears to people before death. She saw it once when my uncle died. I never believed it, but when I was about 6 I had a vivid dream, so vivid I'm convinced it's real, that a snake was wrapping itself around me and squeezing. Apparently that night I was hysterical and refused to sleep. 3 days later another of my uncles died. I'm a believer since.
That's an interesting story. Family legends can really shape how we see the world. Your grandma's experiences and your dreams sound intense. It's wild how something so vivid can stick with you, especially when it aligns with real events. Belief in these tales often comes from personal experiences. Quite a mix of culture and personal history there.
A local bar used to be a popular hangout for the locals, but it has since been torn down. In the early 80s on a swinging Friday night, this guy in a long black trench coat walked in. He was white and really handsome. But he definitely stood out because this, after all, was a reservation bar and full of natives. The main thing that stood out to everyone that night was that he was very good looking and all the girls were oohing and awing over him. He started dancing on the dance floor with everyone and having a good time. Then a girl who was nearby looked down and the guy had hooves for feet. She screamed and yelled about it and he ran out the back door of the bar. A bunch of guys chased him and he ran around the corner of the building towards the front, and he just disappeared.
The twist with him having hooves is something you'd definitely not expect. The reaction of everyone is kind of typical, though. People can be real quick to judge. It's funny how he just vanished like that.
I made up an urban legend to tell the kids. This is partly true. The truth is my town at one point had 3 separate railroad companies merge into each, then split into 3 different directions. The RR gradually went out of business and our warehouse distracts burned down long ago. The myth is long ago when we had RR passing through town, there was a freak accident that causes a massive fire killing the train's crew. Some say their spirits are still riding the rails making their stops, and on a clear night sometimes you can hear the train's horn. And the fun part is you can hear a horn, not from a ghost train but from the RR 15 miles away.
The story has an interesting mix of fact and fiction. The background about the railroad companies is a nice touch. The urban legend adds some mystery to the town's history. It's pretty cool how something real like the sound of a horn can connect to the myth of ghostly spirits.
Killer in the back seat. It doesn't necessarily have to be a person with the intention of killing you, but just the thought of someone laying in your back seat without your knowledge is terrifying. And it can easily happen. I read a story on here one time, I can't find the link ATM, where a guy said that he got home from somewhere and after he got out of his car, he saw this guy riding down the road on his bike. As he looked at the guy on his bike, he looked at him back and gave him a creepy smile. But again, I have no idea where the story is located. If anyone could help me find it, that would be great.
That's a pretty unsettling thought. It's wild how quickly a normal situation can turn eerie just by imagining the worst. I get why that story stuck with you. It's a reminder to always check your backseat before getting in.
My town is super haunted. The big 3 are Charmin, the Billowhack Monster, and Scary Dairy. On Old Creek Road late on misty night as you cross the bridge a man will appear and attack you. Sometimes he's on fire but most of the time he looks like a burn victim with nothing but charred flesh remaining. The Billowhack Monster is a leftover experiment done by scientists back in the 40s. They were trying to create a super solider and goofed up. Whatever they made escaped and haunts the local hills and farmland, scarring campers and mutilating livestock. Supposedly he has the head of a goat, and bleats like one, but walks around on 2 legs and is 7 feet tall. Finally, Scary Dairy is an old haunted dairy farm that may or may not have been used as a cover-up for a secret underground science facility, where they conducted less than ethical experiments.
This sounds like an interesting mix of urban legends. A giant goat-headed figure roaming the hills does paint a creepy picture.
Mormons believe there are three 2,000-year-old guys wandering around performing miracles. In the Book of Mormon, after Jesus was resurrected, he came to America where he ordained 12 apostles, just like he had in Jerusalem. Jesus blessed 3 of these apostles to never die, until he returned anyway. So these 3 American apostles of Jesus are at least 2,000 years old. The old-timer Mormons grew up believing that when something good happened to them, that couldn't be easily explained, that it was the 3 Nephite. A Nephite was a group of people in the Book of Mormon, from which these apostles came from, who came around to perform that miracle. Seriously, they believe these 3 2,000-year-old guys are wandering around doing miracles.
That's an interesting belief system. The idea of 3 apostles roaming around and performing miracles for so long seems pretty unique. It's fascinating how different cultures and religions have their own stories about miraculous figures. The connection to blessings and good fortune through these figures adds a personal touch for the believers. Overall, it reflects a deeply rooted tradition and faith within the community.
Supposedly there are vaults hidden all around where I live. My region was pretty big during Prohibition, since Canada's just across the river, allowing bootleggers to import from there. Supposedly they'd make short tunnels off the sides of basements or even sewers to hide small stashes of alcohol. Rumor is that there's some valuable stuff in some, since they ran more than just alcohol. It's not too far-fetched, but obviously I can't just go for a romp in the sewers or people's basements. Still, it's a neat little lost treasure story.
It's interesting how these vaults from the Prohibition era are said to exist. The idea of hidden tunnels and stashes is definitely intriguing. There's something about local history and forgotten secrets that captures the imagination. While exploring sewers or basements might not be the best idea, it's fun to think about what could be buried beneath. Just a reminder of how places hold stories we might not even know.
That John Wilkes Booth wasn't killed by Boston Corbett at Garrett's farm and wasn't ever properly captured. John May, the doctor summoned to identify the body identified as John Wilkes Booth, whom knew Booth well in life, had this to say, "I'm sure this is Booth. But it doesn't look like him. But this is certainly John Wilkes Booth. It's John Booth because you're telling me you got him, and why would you tell me otherwise, but this doesn't look like the man I knew." Doesn't help that the man that came out of the barn first, David Harold, reportedly insisted that the other man, shot and killed, identified as Booth, was not Booth. Booth's famous leg injury is also not mentioned in the identification process for the body. Unlike some conspirators that think he survived, on all accounts he was in bad shape from his wounds, and I think he died still on the run, out in the wilderness somewhere. Caked mud getting into your failing stitches doesn't tend to keep off infection, least of all when you're only barely eating and drinking while trying to escape capture. The John St. Helens story is very interesting to me, though. Several years later, a thought-to-be dying man in Texas would insist that he was John Wilkes Booth. Photos exist and he does bear a resemblance. As we have the bones of John's brother, a bone attributed to John Wilkes Booth, recovered as part of the official story, and the bones of the man called John St. Helen, this could be resolved via DNA, unless St. Helen's mummification process damages the evidence somehow.
It's interesting how uncertainties linger around Booth's fate. The inconsistent identifications and the idea that he might not have died as presumed adds layers to the story. The fact that a different man claimed to be Booth years later raises questions. Even with potential DNA evidence, the whole scenario seems complicated. The possibility of him still being out there, despite the injuries, keeps the mystery alive.